This is Tim Bryce with my column titled, The Economic Impact of Tampa's YBOR Stadium. I've always found it interesting the amount of money the public invests in sports venues. Most of us are unwitting pawns in financing the various arenas and stadiums around the country, often paying substantial increases in taxes to support them, even when we have absolutely no interest in them. Let me give you an example. Coming from Cincinnati, I remember when they finally closed and razed Crosley Field, the iconic home of Reds baseball, which stood for 58 years and was originally constructed for $225,000. In 1970, it was replaced by Riverfront Stadium, a multi-purpose stadium for the Reds, the NFL's Bengals, and a variety of concerts. It cost less than $50 million to construct, and the public was assured the stadium would last well into the 21st century. This was simply not so. In 2000, the Bengals moved into Paul Brown Stadium at a cost of $455 million. In 2003, the Reds moved into the Great American Ballpark at a cost of $290 million. In other words, a stadium constructed at a cost of $50 million lasted only 33 years and was replaced at a cost of $745 million, all paid for by Cincinnati taxpayers. A similar phenomenon is occurring in Tampa Bay. In 1967, we opened Tampa Stadium, also known as the Big Sombrero, costing $4.4 million for construction. This, of course, became the home of the NFL's Tampa Bay Buccaneers until 1998, 31 years later, when it was replaced by Raymond James Stadium for $168.5 million. In 1996, Tampa opened Amalie Arena for the NHL's Tampa Bay Lightning for $139 million. Finally, St. Petersburg opened Tropicana Field in 1990 for the Major League Baseball's Tampa Bay Rays at a cost of $130 million. Now, just 28 years later, the Rays are abandoning the Trop in favor of a new stadium, YBOR, to be ready by the 2023 season. As an aside, this will be the smallest Major League Baseball stadium in terms of capacity, yet costing $892 million. In other words, a larger stadium constructed in 1990 for $130 million and still in sound condition will be replaced by a new one for $892 million, almost 7 times the cost of Tropicana. Since 1967, Tampa Bay will have paid over $1.3 billion for professional sports venues. I find this disposable way of thinking regarding sports venues to be disturbing, as there appears to be little consideration for upgrading existing facilities at far less cost. By comparison, Tampa Bay's investment in such facilities makes Cincinnati's costs look like a bargain. The reality is both cities are practicing obnoxious economics, with the taxpayers picking up the lion's share of the costs. The teams themselves pay a mere pittance by comparison. The reality, though, is the consumer pays twice for the stadium, once for inflated ticket prices and accompanying high-priced beverages and food, and a second for the increased taxes, particularly sales. Some claim this is the price of progress. I call it wasteful inflation. We're all aware stadiums have been used by sports teams to blackmail cities, whereby the teams demand new lavish facilities or threaten to move to another city. Consequently, cities feel compelled to pay the ransom. In the NFL, we saw this in Baltimore, Cleveland, Houston, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and Oakland. In baseball, we've seen it in Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Kansas City, Milwaukee, Montreal, and Washington, D.C. And we've seen it in spring training facilities here in the Tampa Bay area. To sell the concept of a new sports venue to the public, proponents boast how it will invigorate the local economy. Well, how? By local restaurants, hotels, and air travel? Souvenirs? Parking? No, let's quit kidding ourselves. The only one prospering is the team. To prove this, a 2015 study was performed by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, finding there is little evidence professional sports franchise venues lead to significant economic benefits. One of the principals of the study, Dennis Coates, professor of economics at the University of Maryland, wrote, quote, "If the local government is looking for a policy to foster economic growth, far better candidate policies exist than those subsidizing a professional sports franchise," end quote. In a separate report called Do Economists Reach a Conclusion on Subsidies for Sports Franchises, Stadiums, and Mega Events? Coates writes, quote, "We have seen that economists in general, as represented by Wapple's survey, oppose sports subsidies. Economists reached the nearly unanimous conclusion that tangible economic benefits generated by professional sports facilities and franchises are very small, clearly far smaller than stadium advocates suggest and smaller than the size of the subsidies. The fact that sports subsidies continue to be granted despite the overwhelming preponderance of evidence that no tangible economic benefits are generated by these heavily subsidized professional sports facilities remains a puzzle." End quote. It seems rather reckless that sports venues are given carte blanche by cities to support their teams. Let us remember all of the major leagues are well-financed and deal with millions of dollars, be it Major League Baseball, the National Football League, the National Hockey League, the National Basketball Association, the Arena Football League, Major League Soccer, and more. I have a problem asking John Q. Public, who makes an average salary of $56,000, to sponsor teams and players making millions of dollars. Evidently, I'm not alone, as there is the Americans for Prosperity, a political advocacy group in the United States funded by the Koch brothers. According to their website, quote, "We protect the American dream by fighting each day for lower taxes, less government regulation, and economic prosperity for all," end quote. Their local contact in Tampa Bay is Demetrius Minor. Since they are concerned with fiduciary responsibility in government and the lowering of taxes, the group is well aware of the zealous overspending on sports venues and wants to protect taxpayers. To find out more, look them up on the web at americansforprosperity.org. One last thing to consider. In 2026, just 3 years after the scheduled opening of the new YBOR field, Amalie Arena will be 30 years old and past its prime. In 2028, just 5 years after YBOR, Raymond James Stadium will also be 30 years old. Who is then going to foot the bill for these new stadiums? The teams? Hardly. Like it or not, we are trapped in a vicious cycle. We can either sit back and take it or fight back. It's your choice. Friends, keep the faith. This is Tim Bryce in Palm Harbor, Florida. Follow me on the internet at timbryce.com.